show you how to put in the ACC Camaro Firewall. This firewall is designed specifically to fit either 6-cylinder or 8-cylinder SS Camaro. Before we put this in, there's a couple of things that we need to do. Prepare, we've got to move a couple of lines, make sure that there's no possibility of any lines being caught by the motor or just by vibration. So I'm going to point those out to you. On a 6-cylinder, you have your main water lines that are kind of sit up a little high. They don't actually, in most cases, don't really touch the firewall. But with engine movement and over time, we just want to secure these with a couple of zip ties, just like this, so that these are nice and snug to the motor. Now you don't have to really, crimp these and pinch the water flow or anything. You just want to kind of keep them nice and tucked to the motor. On the other side, pretty much the same thing. You have another, I think this is a vacuum line that sits up a little, sits up straight. You just want to tuck this down, zip it to another vacuum line just to secure it close to the motor. Now the other areas are your power cable here and your hood release cable. Now you can see that we've zip tied this in these two locations, okay, to kind of snug it tight to the main 12-volt wire cable here. And the firewall has a provision for this line. So basically you're just going to zip tie this cable to the power line. And then lastly, you have a small wire harness that's running down to the frame. It's one of the master cylinder reservoir sensor. What you're going to want to do with this is just release it from its frame. Okay, that's a little connector. You just want to pull that loose. And then what that's going to do, it's going to give you enough slack so that this isn't under any kind of severe tension, so that when the firewall's in, it'll sneak through the provided notch for that, and you're not going to have any binding or any possibility of that wire being cut through road vibrations and things. Now, the next part we're going to do is actually drop this in. And there's out of all the firewalls we make, this is probably the trickiest because of all the contours and the things that we've got to go around. Basically we're putting a false firewall in an area that just doesn't want to have a false firewall, but we figured it out, and it's a little tricky, but it's absolutely doable, and that's what we're going to show you. Once all these provisions have been made, basically what we're going to do is we're going to initially just drop this down, and then you got to kind of mold the shape of the firewall around all these contours and lines and stuff. You can't do this by yourself. Not without aggravating yourself. You've got to have a buddy to help you. My son Cameron's going to come and help me lift this. And you can see that notch there is provided for the brake lines. And then we have another little notch here that's provided for this AC line. Now this AC line is very flexible. So it's going to be in different positions from car to car. What we worked out is that this is the general area for that, so you might have to just kind of manipulate this as you're dropping down, just so that this little notch will sit around this cluster on the AC line. And the other things you have to do is just kind of manipulate this in underneath this lip. Now before you drop this down, your wiper cowl area has several retainers up here. These are pretty typical GM retainers. They just go in, you push them down, and they snap into place. In order to release these, you're going to pull the center nail up. It's a 2-piece unit. You're just going to kind of stick a little screwdriver in there. They have tools for that, but you can just really kind of pull them up. Once you pull that up, it's going to release these legs here, and then you'll be able to just pull this right out of the wiper cowl. There's several of them. Looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, possibly 8. You need to get these out of your way, because once you get this down below this area, these retainers will not allow the firewall to go back. And That's kind of critical. So you don't want to be fighting against these. Before you drop it all, just make sure you pull all those out. Really easy. Now, I'm going to drop this down, and I'm just going to kind of mold this in. Now, in the Camaro Firewall, there's a pretty severe bend area, and this is probably what makes the hardest part of installing this whole unit, is this right in here. Now, you can see it's pretty easy to just drop it down pretty much where it goes, and then when you get over on this side, you're going to have to contend with a little heat shield here. See it? That's going to stop you from dropping down a little bit. So you just want to kind of push that out of the way, and this will allow you to work the unit down. Now, these Camaros have kind of like an area underneath the wiper cowl where there's like a little piece of metal. So you got to kind of work this down underneath that as well. So you're going to be, you know, pushing, shoving, manipulating things until you get this underneath that lip. Once you're underneath that lip, it's actually going to be pretty loose in this area. That's going to allow you to manipulate the firewall and discover these little studs in the back. Your factory fiberglass pad in the back is held in by these little round little clips. There's 4 of them altogether. In order to take these out, you just got to kind of unscrew them really, and they'll pop off what appears to be a simple screw stud on the other side. Now those studs, you see these big holes that we have here for those studs. We made them this big because we've noticed that there is a variable. Although those studs are in the same place on every Camaro, they can be to one side or the other with a little variable tolerance in there. So we've made that hole a little bigger, so that once you line that stud up in that hole, you know, you can have this much variable in the final position. So what we're going to do is go ahead and force this down underneath this. This is the hardest part right there. And what you want to do is just kind of drop this down. Make sure you're below those little studs that are in there. Okay. Now you can see that you're going to have the ability to manipulate this a little bit and find your studs. Now, probably the most critical part of this firewall installation is getting this contour right in here. This is where people have the hardest time. Now, what you're going to want to do is find this first stud. Okay. Now, this is the first retainer that you want to put in. This is going to set all the other retainers that you're going to find. And this one here, once you get this in, your next part about putting this firewall in is to actually contour. When you contour this bend correctly, you'll discover the other pin needs to be right where it's at. If you look at this now, okay, you look at the position of these pins, what you want to do is line this up. You want to try to ideally get it in the center. So you get I got a little bit of manipulation to do to put this retainer to fit through the hole. Now these are the same type of factory retainers, only we've designed them to just push right on. So once you get your stud through the center of that hole, or relatively in the center, you can push this in, and that's your first unit that you're going to install. So let's go ahead and do that. Push that in. That'll give you an alignment there, or you can go ahead and get this. Push it in harder. Okay. Now, I'll show you the next one. Okay, it's just a little bit over. Okay, so in order to get this to fit right, we're going to ask you to push this in. You see how it goes over like that? That's what's going to allow this whole setup to work. This is forcing you to contour the firewall to the actual firewall of the car. Believe it or not, we send this to you already bent like that, but what happens is, in the process of dropping this down, this flattens out a little bit. So this procedure you're just going to always have to do. You're just going to have to push it in place, which is going to allow you to set the next retainer. At this point you want to inspect, make sure that there's nothing going to be threatening here. So we're probably going to have to add or tighten up these zip ties a little bit, just so that you can have at the very least, about 1/4 of an inch of clearance between any kind of lines or water hoses. Once again, you have a small contour that you have to contend with, and in order to get this last stud to be centered and to fit properly, you're going to have to do a little bit more contouring in here. Our stud is in a pretty good position, but without forming this here, as soon as you put that stud in and push this in, it's going to want to pop out. So right here, you need to add a little bit more bend. Pretty easy to do. Just kind of pull this forward a little, and then just manipulate this by hand and put your contour in. Again, it doesn't really matter how well we do this at the factory, because in the process of sliding this in position, all these bends are going to come out. So these are just one of the factors that you have to contend with when you're putting in a unit like this. You're just going to have to form it and contour it so that you can get it to fit just right. Once this goes in, is in position, your retainers, which aren't really designed to hold a lot of tension or a lot of pressure, they're just basically, we're designed to hold in a pad, the factory fiberglass heat pad. So they're not really designed to really have a lot of tension. So what we're going to do is you're going to get a new set of these, and then we're going to give you some chrome stainless caps to pop over this, and that's going to hide the top of your button and give you some nice good looking firewall. Now last one, a little tricky because it's up in the corner, but you can see that with all the other ones in, that you're in a perfect position there. I don't know if you can see that or not. That's right dead center. That's exactly what you want. That's our perfect position. So we're going to go ahead and put that one in. Once your firewall is in, you want to make sure that you've got pretty good clearance for your lines. You don't want to have anything that's binding, anything that's going to become a problem down the road. Something like that, just move that away so it's not under pressure. You don't have a lot of tension there. Your wire harness for your brakes, you can see there's not tension here. It's not binding. You're not going to have to worry about that causing any problems down the road, and or causing any kind of short or anything like that. So once your firewall is in perfect position, you should have plenty of clearance for all your stuff. Now that you've got the firewall in, I want to bring your attention to this area here and explain to you why this has two different shapes here. In some applications, either for the V6 or the SS model, there's a procedure that we do which is called a wire tuck. And that's a specific procedure to kind of reroute all these hoses, water hoses, and some of these lines so that you can put on some of the other parts that we make. In the SS version, these lines can be routed, which are, when you take the factory engine shroud off, they're routed over the motor in a pretty crazy place actually. It goes over the motor and down to the water pump, which is in the front. So in our wire tuck procedure, we ask you to take these molded lines off and reroute them against the firewall underneath the bracket for the ABS brakes and out from here and into the front. And what it essentially does is it eliminates the hot water hoses from draping over the motor. And that's what this port is for. Because once you do that, it's going to come from the firewall down in this direction. You're going to zip tie them to these lines here, these ABS brake lines. That's what this is for. Now, on this V6 model, obviously, it's a different arrangement. We're not going to do that. Or even on the SS model, if you didn't elect to do a wire tuck, we've provided this plate. And what this plate does is it's going to hide and contain that hole. It's designed to slip over these lines, just like so. Go around your heat shield and mount to the firewall, just like that. Now, in order to do that, you might have to do a little contouring as well, making sure that this will mold and shape to the firewall and not pop out anywhere. So you're just going to kind of take a look at that and just kind of mold it in your hands a little bit, just so that you can get a nice contour to it. Double stick tape, peel this off and just set it in place. Now you don't want to remove this blue liner yet, because you want to be able to press this down and get it into position and attach without putting fingerprints and stuff all over it. You take that off when you're done. So you're just going to slide this down in here. Make sure you're in a good position. Go ahead and press it to the firewall. And that makes for a filler plate.